I am CouchGoob and welcome to a video of the Evil West on the PlayStation 5, available on the PlayStation Network for the base level subscription, so bonuses there. This retails at 50 quid still. Why saying it like that? Why saying 50 quid with like squinted eyes? Because I'm playing Remnant from the Ashes 2 and probably most of you lot are as well, and this is, let's say, different. It's from Flying Wild Hog. I put a video out about a previous game that they put onto Game Pass, which was Shadow Warrior 3. One of my worst performing videos of 2022. I took it down, but it was a hell of a game. It was like a shooter, first person, very fast, very hectic, beautiful granular explosions and graphics and colour. Now let's get to the colour. The whole front end of the game, including the tutorial section, is in this auburn copper sunrise I'm going to go with, and it's a bit jarring. It feels quite dated to have such a shallow colour palette to be working with a game that is sitting on my SSD and was out sort of in 2022, but it had its main releases on most of the consoles this time last year. Also not performing like a PlayStation 5 game, with huge frame drops, middle of the combat, and just feeling very untidy. Now remember, I am referring to the front end tutorial. This is one of those games that allows you to access it whilst it's downloading to get a little bit of a taster. And that introduction is one of the worst I've ever had the misfortune of coming across in a third-person ARPG. They do get on top of things though, and don't judge this game on that front end.
That gathering won't find itself, you know? Move it.
Once you're out of Tangerine Town, you're suddenly like, oh right, you can do good graphics then. This is a beautifully built westernized world, and I love the idea of the vampires and ghouls introduction. It's really cool splicing of two laws. You've got the weaponry on one side and then all of the beasts and vampiric crap on the other. Where could you possibly go wrong? Well, for starters, the character in the inventory is gotta be 720p, unspinnable as well, and I really enjoyed the outfit. I was like, wow, this looks like Monster Hunter level of armor intricacy, and I'm going to switch out really cool steampunk things, and what the fuck? I found a silk scarf, that was it on the introduction front end. They missed a trick there with introducing cool new cosmetics early doors, because that gives the player an idea of what they're going to expect. I still can't deny how flashy this outside section looks, and it does keep coming back. You're not always in orange hell. Let's talk about this combat, and let's talk about how it performed on reviews. It's mediocre, it's kind of below par. Some people really enjoy this, and I totally can see why. Look at this gunplay, it is very reminiscent. Wants to promote a combination of punching and range firing. A little bit like Devil May Cry wants you to switch out and even keep things up in the air with the bullets. It's extremely flashy on the combat. You have a double tap roll and a dodge, which seems to be more convenient and something I migrated to. But whilst you're pulling all this stuff off, some of the frames can go well below 30. I'm going to look up what specs this is advertised at, but this is not a PEG 60 unfortunately. It's a lock 30 in 4K, which is actually surprising. Why didn't I check that before playing the game? Because it starts to play with my brain and I start getting biased. A little bit like Starfield, this feels a lot better than a locked 30 frames per second. The drops that I'm getting, they feel like the system's chugging with loading in stuff in the background. That might be able to be smoothed out on future patches. The game's been out a year and a half. Whether that resolution is a seller is something else, but it's good to have something that's actually true 4K, but again, I think we could do better than 30 frames per second. Talking of seconds, the minute-to-minute combat is really satisfying though. You have a slight auto-aim on these circles that appear, which are technically weak spots. You can one-shot kill if you get it in time, but you feel really comfortable with the dodge and avoid, and that ranged weapon once the rifle comes in, and the parry. Notice all of the padlocks in the UI on the corners. I'm literally still waiting to get a decent block. Also unbelievably linear, with going down the one corridor every time, getting introduced to arenas of enemies, sometimes stacked up right next to each other. It kind of feels a little bit like a game that just wants to show off its combat. It's not too worried about exploration. Its strengths are really in that incredibly fast, extremely bloody, gory and satisfying violence. Once that intro's out the way, again, it blue balls you with some beautiful graphics. This is almost identical to a Red Dead scene, which I put out on a video. Go on, just do a split. I'll do a split.
Home sweet home. Mr. Rentier, what a nice surprise.
The block, which they put over on L1, which is like an electricity thing, kind of changes the combat up quite a lot. It means that you don't have to keep double tapping to avoid and get out of the way. You can kind of hold your ground and start getting cool combos in. It's a real cool linking move, and it looks pretty spectacular. You can also Devil May Cry, winch, pull them towards you, close up gaps. The whole thing kind of works once you get that beautiful electric shield. I did want to just discuss that. You've heard me mention Remnant from the Ashes, both 1 and 2. Also compared it to Devil May Cry more than once with the keepy uppy and the get over here style move. Now there's also a bit of platinum in here with like a cool R3 kick that interrupts enemies, and you do get a certain amount of reward for a well-timed dodge. Once that shield's brought in, things really do change up, and it feels like an actual ARPG that's so hectic in places it can't even handle its own crowds to a certain extent, and those frame rates are all over the shop. But those aforementioned studios and games are absolutely amazing. So in theory, this should be really good. And it kind of is. It's a little bit like something made with identical ingredients, but at the end, it just doesn't taste right. Some of it's to do with whether it can't make its mind up on its combat model, full-on melee or range. Blending the two is really difficult, and few games get the balance right. Remnant 2 being the first thing that comes to mind. It doesn't overcomplicate things. That's something I want to mention. You've got R3, R2, R1 as punch. You've got L1 as the block, and you've also got your double tap to avoid. You're swamped with options, and that can just slow things down. If it's just keeping it simple, then things can get a lot more controlled. In its defense though, there's a lot going on. One of the moves allows you to get someone in the air and then punch them back, either hit an enemy behind them or go into one of those spiked poles, or even set off explosions. There's quite a lot of chain reactionary stuff in these arenas for you to muck around with. Once the electricity comes in, blood's everywhere, things are exploding, you realise you are playing a 10th generation game, but then a frame will drop and you'd be like, for God's sakes, thankfully I didn't spend 50 quid on this. Here's another point I wanted to make, and this one's weird. A lot of you are going to be like, what the hell, you need to get out more. But the game is multiplayer online, okay, which I didn't test, obviously. Single player, local co-op, you know the channel. What that has discounted is the ability to be able to meddle around with time, because that's not something you could implement with two humans playing. In the single player, it would be amazing if you had a Bayonetta style reward on the dodge that slowed everything down, a bit like Trepang, where you could just see all these intricacies on enemy design and element effects. It's all rushing past you a little bit quick. That one's a shame. I know they've lent towards multiplayer to sort of keep the game as relevant as possible, but this would have worked, and I wish there was more push into its single player model. This section, it went completely crazy and just kept shoving more and more at me. I thought this was a direction the game was going to go in, but it turns out it's like a cutscene. The horde comes in to the base, so to speak, so it then quits when things get really hectic. But this is what I want all the time. 18 plus enemies on screen, more area effect weapons, you get a grand slam come in, and things start to get a bit more fluid. I want to see some improvements on patches with this, and it brings me over to the point of its price and its accessibility currently. This is a perfect PlayStation Network Essential Subscription Edition. It's brilliant to dip your toe into if you're a fan of Remnant and you want some really white knuckle action at no extra brain cost. You will find it here. It's not going to chug the machine and you won't hear the fan going on much. This blistering pace cannot be ignored, and if you're a huge fan of Evil West and you want more of this, then Shadow Warrior 3 is kind of almost identical with that system of pushback. It's just a first-person shooter set in an amazing-looking feudal Asian forest world. It's a very beautiful game. Whilst it's up on screen, I did want to mention that the human antagonists are pretty cool, and it's quite fun coming across other gunslingers and aiming for that weak spot. The trading in fire and dodging bullets is another satisfying area, so it manages to straddle Wild West gunplay along with murdering werewolves with electricity. Look how great it looks once you're out of Tangerine Zone. I have been Couch Coup. Don't forget who your real dad is. I will see you down there.